All right, well, let's move on to the story about YouTube censorship because it is relevant. People who are hosting shows all over YouTube are complaining about being removed without notice, without any kind of terms of service warning, without any kind of advance at all, for the crime of saying anything that may not even be pro-Russia.
Yeah, look at this. So YouTube just wiped out the entire video archive of Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Chris Hedges, including his interviews with me, Stephen Donziger, about my legal Chevron prosecution and detention. And now Chris Hedges wrote a whole piece on this on his website. The entire archive of my 6 years of my show called On Contact have been removed. Gone.
Including all manner of content that has nothing to do with the current social or global climate. For instance, Cornel West is a sociologist, right? Noam Chomsky, media theorist, Wendy Brown, Paul Street. The
Name
list
Wolf. Who's
goes on and on of people who are fairly inoffensive people and have nothing to do with Ukraine and Russia. Why? Why did this happen?
Well, and why? Who cares if it's offensive or not, right?
Are you saying they were taken down too, or Chris Hedges' interviews with them were taken down?
Chris Hedges' interviews with them. Sorry, she wasn't clear about
all
that.
Of his
I was
channels.
gonna say I was gonna say Noam Chomsky, like taking down all of his stuff. I was like, whoa, wait a minute.
I know exactly. No. Yeah, so
that may still be coming.
His interviews, and so the entire archive of his On Contact, the Emmy-nominated show that he hosted for 6 years for RT America and RT International, had just disappeared from YouTube. Gone. Are the interviews with Nathaniel Philbrick, who I love. He's a great writer. He's a great historian. He interviewed him about George Washington, about his book on George Washington. Like, that's gone. That's gone. Doesn't matter. His biography, gone is the discussion with Kay Bird of his biography of Robert Oppenheimer. Again, gone. Discussions about James Joyce's Ulysses. You mentioned Cornel West. His interviews with Noam Chomsky. On and on and on. The list goes. Wiped away, gone.
Whether or not he had those archived?
I don't know if he does or not. Probably does. I didn't get through that.
Well, he says he did these on, he was on RT prior. So it's possible that he had a terms of service agreement if he was hosting on behalf of a network, that he didn't keep his own files, and that things that he produced, a lot of times this is content creators' agreements. So those may or may not exist somewhere else. But just because now YouTube says that they are going to change their terms of service so that anybody trivializing the Russian-Ukraine war will be violating community guidelines by posting videos that glorify or promote violence. Well, these videos had nothing to do with that. It was just the platform. Right.
And this, again, is why I want you guys all, this is not me shilling for the newsletter. But we have a newsletter, morninginvest.com. Go there and sign up because, again, as Vartan asks here, do you have a second channel in case YouTube takes you down? When we cover these complex stories, when we cover these controversial stories, YouTube demonetizes us. We get alerts from YouTube all the time telling us that we're getting close. They took us down for a whole week when we covered a story that ended up being true. The facts were on our side. Did YouTube apologize? No, but they still took us down for a week. A whole week. We've got a whole team here, right? That's a whole group of employees that work on this show. Yeah, it doesn't matter. They just take you down.
And they don't even let you post on the community feed to let your audience know what happened. Like, you have no way to communicate with people to let them know, and that's why the newsletter is so important.
Yeah, so sign up for our newsletter because you get an email every day with the newsletter, but then we can also send you an email in case something happens. We can point you over here to Rumble or these other. By the way, we're working on our Rumble channel right now. So yes, we are working on our backups. But I want to go back to something Chris Hedges says in his piece. He says, the Ukraine war, which I denounced as a criminal war of aggression when it began, is a sterling example. Any effort to put it into historical context to suggest that the betrayal of agreements by the West with Moscow, meaning the Minsk agreements, which I covered as a reporter in Eastern Europe during the collapse of the Soviet Union, along with the expansion of NATO, might have baited Russia into the conflict. That's just dismissed. That's nuance, that's complexity, ambiguity, historical context, self-criticism, all banished.
And think about
Again,
this.
it's an overly simplistic explanation, right? We have to all buy into the fact that Ukraine is a glorious utopia at this point and should not be imposed upon by Russia, the aggressor, the bad guy. There is blame to be shared here. You are not allowed to have any kind of nuance
Right,
at
even
all.
Noam
Think about
Chomsky.
this. This is a very important part of this. He was allowed to say that and be critical of Ukraine on Russian television, on RT, but not in the United States, not on YouTube, not on our media. So Russia television allowed him to be critical of Russia. But
isn't
we
it
don't.
amazing? Because, and then of course, then the EU and the United States, they take down RT. So they've removed RT America, right? The offices are closed up now. Like, unbelievable that this is happening in the United States of America, right? RT has had fairer, more balanced, and more nuanced coverage than even CNN or any of the mainstream media in the West. Isn't that unbelievable? That a Russia state television or state-backed media had actually better coverage of what's going on and critical of Russia too. The only thing that the journalists who work for RT were told, you have to back everything up with facts and sources. That's it. You have to back everything back. You have to back everything up with facts and sources for your stuff, for your articles.
Well, in related news, an Indian news network, WION, has been also banned from YouTube for daring to air a speech from Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and his Ukrainian equivalent, Dmytro Kuleba. It's interesting as they talk about this. They say, look, YouTube refuses to censor assassination calls by U.S. senators against Vladimir Putin, but they're saying we just don't allow violence or calls for violence. But Senator Lindsey Graham can repeatedly go on YouTube and say that he would like Vladimir Putin to be assassinated. But they have blocked this network for broadcasting a live speech by Russia's foreign minister.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. So Lindsey Graham can go on there.
And what did he say? Lavrov said, we didn't attack Ukraine. We were actually going in to defend these separatist regions. Again, nuance, right? And I'm not defending Russia's presence in Ukraine, but I am listening to what the words are, right? It's important to have some kind of context, but we're not supposed to do that.
Right.
Well, and you know what I find funny is, like, if you listen to Putin, if you listen to his administration, they're all very articulate and they speak to the point. If you listen to any U.S. senator, congressman, the president of the United States, they just babble on about ridiculous stuff. And it's like, why are we? Is that why they don't want us listening to them? Because they actually make more sense than our politicians? Like,
well, but I mean, it's also like I think it would be like naive to think that Russian politicians are honest any more than our politicians.
But
I know,
but it doesn't matter. We get to listen to our dishonest senators.
No,
and stuff,
exactly.
So we should get to listen to the dishonest Russians.
Right. Vladimir Zelensky is no angel either. Right. And so, but we decide which one of them is virtuous and which one of them is not. Again, a reminder that Ukraine has repeatedly been denied entrance into the European Union because of corruption inside the government and because of a Nazi movement that the government has refused to clean up.
Do you guys know about Seymour Hersh? You guys raise your hand if you know who Seymour Hersh is. He died, I think he died a few years ago, if I'm not mistaken. One of the great social investigative journalists in American history, who of course exposed the massacre at My Lai in Vietnam, where 500 unarmed Vietnamese civilians were killed by U.S. soldiers. In fact, that anniversary just happened like 2 weeks ago, actually, the My Lai massacre. Seymour Hersh broke that story, right? He also, of course, broke the story about Abu Ghraib, the prison in Abu Ghraib, where the U.S. was torturing prisoners at Abu Ghraib in Iraq, right? Seymour Hersh, Cy Hersh, the great reporter. And Chris Hedges' interview with Cy Hersh talking about the decay of the American media, that's gone. You can't watch it anymore because YouTube took it down. Vanished, gone, and no longer exists on YouTube. Just one of many examples that's just been removed and censored because YouTube just didn't like what someone had to say about the nuance of this war. Who is YouTube? First of all, who are Twitter and who are YouTube to be the arbiters of truth? That's my biggest. Like, Twitter the other day is in trouble because they censored somebody's post for retweet. In fact, mine was retweeted. I retweeted or I tweeted an article from RT about the CDC covering up the COVID deaths, the numbers, right? And Twitter blocks it and puts, this is from a Russian-backed media organization. I got all these Twitter responses like, Clayton, you should be ashamed of yourself. Like, really? Okay, if I would have just linked you to the other American media sources here, then that would have been okay.
Yeah,
but this
and
is
it wouldn't
true.
have said this media brought to you by Pfizer.
I mean, right, this media brought to you by Pfizer. Exactly. And so what Twitter had to walk it back. Twitter said, we made a mistake. We made a mistake. In fact, the CDC did revise its COVID death numbers. But again, you're not allowed to see it because Twitter and YouTube and Facebook and all of these other big media organizations decide what you get to see.
I was just reading this story about how Google was hacked by the Chinese state in 2009, right? And how they decided to respond was by pulling out of China altogether. But then they just couldn't help themselves because they wanted back in that market because it's so lucrative, right? And so they said, well, we'll try to give them some censored search because the Chinese government is not down with uncensored search results, right?
Right. Like if you look up Tiananmen Square under Google or under China's state media, you'll just see beautiful pictures of the square.
Right.
You
No
won't see
history
a person
of blood.
standing in front of a tank being mowed down by a tank. No. You'll just see
Right.
beautiful pictures of Tiananmen Square.
And so they said, well, we'll try and give them some search, but we'll help kind of gradually educate Chinese people with some search that's relevant while still following the guidelines. And in this book, this is how they tell me the world ends. New York Times reporter who reports on the cyber arms race. She says, I love this quote, such rationalization was common in Silicon Valley where tech leaders and founders have come to think of themselves as prophets, if not deities, delivering free speech and the tools of self-expression to the masses and thereby changing the world. Many a tech CEO has come to think of themselves as the rightful heir to Steve Jobs, whose megalomania was excused as a byproduct of his ability to deliver, right? So they think like, I got this, right? Especially Sergey Brin, who is a Russian Jew whose family escaped, and he sort of feels like, oh, I know what it is to be persecuted in a world that doesn't have free speech, so I'm going to set the guidelines. Even though he's no longer CEO of Google, it's still sort of indicative of how these tech companies operate. Like, oh, it's okay. They tell us. It's so stinking patronizing.
Well, you look at Jack Dorsey with his like prophet like beard, like he's just going on a hermitage somewhere, right?
Yes.
And he's like there with like, smoking hookahs, and he's like, I'm going to tell you what you're allowed to see on Twitter. I'm going to censor the things that you shouldn't be allowed to see, and I will give unto you. That's why there's all this.
But they got in trouble for not doing that in the Trump election. Liberals who had a legitimate loss said we lost because Twitter and Google and YouTube were allowing various voices. That's your fault. We called them in front of Senate hearing committees and said, like, how are you going to do this better? Well, this is what we get, right? Because we didn't like that Trump won. Now we get a censored media. Now they're afraid and they think that they have all the answers. It's such bull.
Well, and also now there's the discussion, and who knows if it's going to happen or not, but Elon Musk the other day posting that tweet asking, do you feel that Twitter is an open place of free speech? And a lot of people said, and he said, your answer is important. So there's a lot of rumors rumbling that he's about to launch his own social media where it'd be 100% uncensored. You can say whatever you want. All right,
They'll
Elon.
go after him even more.
That's
The
the thing.
government already doesn't like him.
I wish
so.
I could contact him because I have an idea for MySpace that I think he would get on board with.
For MySpace.
We could
But I mean,
build
the
it
thing
together.
is, like, I don't
MySpace
think
too.
that the government's hands are out of this censorship. Like, I don't think it's just Twitter and YouTube. I mean, it's coming from the top as well, I think. And so I think even
Absolutely
Oh,
correct.
of course it is.
if Elon starts his own company, he's going to have to house it outside of the United States.
The United
and it wouldn't
States-
surprise me if the U.S. blocked access to it.
Well, it could
Like they
be.
did
You're
RT.
right. You're right. Exactly. So
Look what they did to Parler.
they're the ones that decide. But then, of course, who runs these massive nodes and servers and, Amazon Web Services and everything else? Like if the government calls and gets on the phone with Microsoft, is like, hey, you've got a lot of software holes. A lot of foreign governments are exploiting your software. Can you fix this, please? Or we're going to take some action. Like, you better do this. And then Bill Gates sends out that memo that shook the world. We're like, we're going to take security seriously. Oh, where'd you come up with that idea? Because the government called you.
Yes.
To do it. So yes, you're absolutely right, Philip. Like the government is going to oversee it. They're going to get on the phone. They're going to have, these CEOs over for dinner. They're going to tell them what they like, what they don't like. And, these woke politicians and woke Hollywood and woke Silicon Valley all get together and decide what you can see. But at the end of the day, great journalism is censored, gone from this discussion. And even just showing a live speech from a person who's involved in the war gets you blocked because YouTube doesn't like it. So
they
again,
need to change the name to RTube now because it's not ours anymore. It's not about you anymore. It's about them.
was YouTube.
Oh, you mean O-U-R.
Was your tube.
Yeah,
Now it's not your tube anymore. If you like this content, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Also, we have a membership program. For the price of a cup of coffee once a month, you can support independent journalism just by going to morninginvest.com/join.
You get access to exclusive videos, plus the ability to join and chat with us live. We really appreciate your subscription, and you are supporting independent journalism.